welcome back, midnight viewers, to Father Malone's Weekly Roundup. I am Father Malone. Not joining me today, observing a day of silence, is Ripley Jean. I just want to take a moment, we both do, to send condolences to my friend Jasmine and her husband Garrett. They just lost their pug, also named Ripley. All our love to both of you. That's 2 UK pugs we've lost recently. Ripley, and of course the legend Mr. Puggles. They're sorely missed. And I'm sorry to start so somber, but respect must be paid. Okay, let me tell you a weirdo story real quick. So, one of my absolute best friends is a gal named Jackie. She and I served in the paranormal trenches together, which is actually true. We were employed at the Haunted Museum. Years ago, Jackie gave me a hardcover compendium of the original manga for Space Battleship Yamato. That was a wildly popular comic when it was first published, and then it got turned into an animated TV show, and when that show hit our shores, it was rechristened Star Blazers. I talk about formative entertainment a lot here on the Roundup, and this one is pretty fucking high on that list. A serialized animated show about the desperate mission to collect technology that will rehabilitate Earth's atmosphere so we can return to the surface. That's just one of a dozen really horrible concepts a young brain shouldn't be processing. Anyway, I was obsessed with the show. I have the DVDs, and when Jackie gave me the book, I realized I had never actually laid eyes on the original artwork or storytelling. So I devoured it pretty quickly and then put it back on the shelf. Being basically a nomad, most of my possessions end up in boxes, which is where like 90% of my library is currently. So yesterday I'm out combing through the boxes looking for one thing in particular when I find that Yamato comic. And I think to myself, I didn't take the time to read it correctly and actually luxuriate in some of the art. So I spent most of the day reading it, and then I went to sleep, and then I got up at my usual ungodly hour. And since I've convinced myself to do an episode about the Yamato experience, I want to keep on reading, but it's 1 a.m. and I'm bleary-eyed, so instead I put on the first season of the show. I'm 3 episodes in, and I get a message on my phone. It's past 2 a.m. now. Everyone except for my UK friends are asleep, so naturally I assume someone's in trouble or someone's dead. No, the message is from Jackie, and it's a picture of a Yamato t-shirt, and the message is, "This made me think of you." And in the background I can see that all of the items for sale in the store are labeled in Japanese, because she's in fucking Tokyo, like out of the blue, and she sends me a Yamato picture while I'm watching Yamato, which I'm only doing because I found the book that she gave me earlier the previous day. That's fucking bizarre, right? Am I crazy? I might be. Let me know. Email address is in the show notes. If you write in, you might be
Pen pals from around the world.
On our episode about Star Trek First Contact, I asked viewers to write in to let HP know how wrong he is about the Borg Queen. He argued that the Borg are a collective, and giving it one body and one voice was ill-advised. And I argue that HP is a tune-ahead. Sci-Fi Aaron wrote in to say, quote, "I agree with Father Malone here. They needed a central villain to defeat in the film. They did without on The Next Generation with the best of both worlds, but on a cinematic level, you need something more tangible and viewable on the big screen. The Borg Queen works for me. Also, the film visually changes how you see the Borg and all of Star Trek forward from this point on. Couldn't agree more." Paris Spooky, these are Instagram handles, by the way. Although Paris Spooky Malone has a pretty good ring to it. Anyway, Paris Spooky writes in about Data's restraints. Quote, "I just didn't like the Spencer Gifts electronic light they tested his head on. Takes me out every time." Good God, I can't believe we didn't mention those. I'm shocked the Borg drones weren't wearing fundies. You remember those? Every kid stared in wonders at the packaging for fundies in Spencer Gifts. And that's the end of the mail this week. Hit the show notes if you've got something to say. In the meantime, let's talk suburbs. Suburbia. Those rows of houses that are all the same and no one seems to care. Monkey's reference. Suburbs are not a new idea at all. The villages that grew up around the perimeter of castle walls are technically a suburb. But if you say the word now, it's more likely tied to the post-war boom of everything. That included the settling of towns around major metropolitan spots. That would then spur growth in transportation. We need roads for these folks to get back into the city for work, but we also need new shopping centers closer to the action, or lack thereof. It all started around New York and Boston, but then the concept spread nationwide. And with the GI Bill and literally millions of new homeowners, suddenly the national focus was less urban playboy and more Leave It to Beaver. In fact, all of those houses in all of those gridded-out neighborhoods looked like everything you were seeing on TV. Or at least that's what they kept telling us. Bland, uninteresting folk having mild adventures with little to no actual human drama, and it was all so darn pleasant. Fiction authors were the vanguard at seeing the potential for dread, both real and existential, that could breed in these shiny new habitats. Books like Peyton Place and I Am Legend laid bare the grim reality behind the apple pie illusions. Meanwhile, Rebel Without a Cause is as much about suburban ennui as it is teenage rebellion. The only real bucking of the newly minted Ain't America Great formula were the families Adams and Munster, allowing a bit of the crypt to squat nicely amongst the picket fences. Now, if you listen to the show with any regularity, I mean midnight viewing overall, not necessarily the roundup, you have heard us cover Rod Serling's Twilight Zone follow-up, Night Gallery. But you might not know that midnight viewing mutated from an earlier podcast. That one's called Dreams for Sale, the Twilight Zone 85 podcast. So you know I've got a lot of love for Mr. Serling. I beat up on him a lot during Night Gallery because he deserved it, but there's no denying what a fucking juggernaut he was in the world of television and how important as a dramatist he was overall. And I think his finest piece of fiction can be found in the first season of the original Twilight Zone, a show just too vast in number to ever commit to a critical appraisal on my part, believe me. And that was an episode called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. You know it. Power goes out in a suburban neighborhood without explanation or word from the outside world. And within hours, the residents have whipped themselves into a frenzy about invasion, and none of their fellow homeowners are who they say they are. It's a tight, incredibly economical, and highly intuitive and prescient portrait of everything wrong with forced community. It's kind of a yardstick that any investigation into suburban Gothic must be measured against, or at least acknowledged as the legend that must be overcome. And boy, haven't they tried. There were sporadic jabs at suburbia throughout the 60s and 70s, but it was the 80s, when those suburban kids finally got the keys to Dad's movie-making machines, that the floodgates were open on examining every aspect of that life, high, low, and indifferent. On that low end, the, hey, you know that environment actually fucking sucks? And you had flicks like Nightmare on Elm Street and Parents and The Stepfather. But the one that actually gets it right, the one that quite handily takes that Monsters Are Due on Maple Street metric and puts it out on the curb with the rest of the well-manicured refuse, that's David Lynch's 1986 masterpiece, Blue Velvet. He mixes the seething, writhing, wriggling black heart of suburbia into a crazy cocktail that's equal parts bitter realism and wild hallucination. It's not a nuts and bolts, hey there neighbor, I see you've got a new model Chevy in the driveway, examination of life around a cul-de-sac, but then again it is. Meanwhile, the world's biggest booster of the glories of prefab settlements was Steven Spielberg. Granted, E.T. and Close Encounters did enough heavy lifting toward the notion that there's nowhere safer than suburbia. You'll notice the aliens will snatch your kid out of a remote farmhouse, but they never go near Roy Neary's neighborhood. He has to leave the safety of those well-lit streets to meet them. But it was the films that he produced or executive produced that really laid a new neon halcyon glow on the concept of the suburbs. The Goonies, come on man, The Money Pit, and of course, the film that manages to lionize the suburbs in two separate timelines, Back to the Future. Interestingly, it would be Spielberg to take the big studio swipes at the suburbs as well. Poltergeist, even though he was too busy to direct it, and not allowed by the Guild, so we know it was Tobe Hooper, Poltergeist began its life in a script penned by Spielberg himself. I highly encourage everyone to give it a read if you can find it. Maybe I will link it in the show notes. Check there later. It is nearly identical to the movie we got, with some finer character shading added by Mark Victor and Michael Grace. It's filled with everything that frightened him about his early suburban life. You know, the one that he recently ladled a big old dump of gauze over with the Fablemans. The Fablemans, like they're storytellers. Gee whiz. Now, Poltergeist is a great film. But it's amusing to me that the filmmaker, under Spielberg's banner, that would deliver the darkest critique of suburbia wouldn't be the one who made Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Nope, it's the Piranha Guy. Gremlins, as originally intended, would have been a nasty little horror flick that teens would still gather around generationally to view with no more or less weight than I Know What You Did Last Summer. It certainly wouldn't have been the worldwide success that somehow manages to be a warm-hearted view of a simpler way of American living while delighting in its absolute evisceration. That is because of Joe Dante. When I mentioned tonight's topic a few weeks ago, I said Dante seemed to be having a moment. There was the animated Gremlins show on HBO. They've recently announced a third Gremlins film, and now a TV series based on his film The Burbs. It's great that everyone's recognizing how influential he's been on popular culture, but I've also noticed how little work everyone is throwing him these days. You'd think Spielberg, who will continue to benefit from the new sequel, would break him off some DreamWorks money to make that biopic of Roger Corman he's been trying to get off the ground. When I spoke to Dante's Hollywood Boulevard co-director and lifelong friend Alan Arkish, He told me they'd tried to get a streaming series going about Corman's studio during the 1970s, when they were cutting trailers together there. But no go. So what gives? Why is Dante relegated to co-hosting a podcast with Josh Olson? Here is my impression of the movies that made me. Yeah, blah, 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 Taxi Driver, blah, 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 Sweat, Glistening, blah, 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 Lee Marvin, blah, 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 blah. No, that was actually Ida Lupino in a terrific picture from 1953. And scene. Like all those auteurs I mentioned when I was talking about Sam Raimi, Joe Dante's name belongs foursquare beside them. He came out of the cinematic gate with an already cemented visual style. And better, he comes from a place of love of every genre, of every picture, and manages to blend them all seamlessly. How do you go from the wackiness of gremlins dressed like gangsters and flash dancing to the Santa Claus story and not give the audience whiplash? Good luck, Chris Columbus. I'm sure that third film's going to be great. Dante followed Explorers with the Dennis Quaid, Martin Short miniaturization flick Inner Space, during which time he was developing his next feature, called Little Man Tate, eventually made by Jodie Foster. Meanwhile, over at Imagine Entertainment, they were touting a screenplay referred to as Ozzie and Harriet Meet Charles Manson by its author Dana Olson, a parody of Rear Window called Life in the Burbs, inspired by the fact that every town seems to harbor a story of some crazed murderous event by some seemingly normal suburban guy, and the fact that every neighborhood seemed to have a house that was run down and frightening. That's the fact that Joe Dante seized on when the script landed on his desk, having had his own experience with a neighborhood house gone to rack and ruin. After a brief flirtation with Billy Crystal, Tom Hanks was cast in the lead, and the rest of the film is peppered with Dante regulars like Dick Miller and Robert Picardo and Henry Gibson, and I could go on.
All Tom Hanks wanted was a quiet vacation at home.
This is what I need, Carol. I need this.
Welcome to Mayfield Place. A typical street in the Burbs.
Morning, Walter.
Where nothing much ever happened.
Walter's dog just took a dump on Rumsfield's lawn again.
Until the Klopeks moved in.
Klopex?
Klopex.
Klopek. No one goes in, no one comes out.
Neighbors from hell.
It was a nice place to live.
He said he thinks the Klopeks are evil incarnate.
Well, you're much too smart to fall for that, aren't you, honey?
But now,
Carol.
you wouldn't want to visit there.
Ray.
This is Walter.
The Burbs.
I'm going over the fence, and I'm not coming back till I find a dead body.
Ray, do you want him to take your family, kidnap them, tear their livers out, and make some kind of satanic pate? We found Walter!
We got a real problem.
I hit the gas line, I'd run!
God, I love this street.
Tom Hanks.
I think we are overreacting.
No!
The Burbs. It's one hell of a neighborhood.
Hey, honey, I think we should move.
But they had to go on immediately. 1988 saw one of the most bitter writer strikes in the WGA's history, and The Burbs, as it was now called, needed to be in production to beat the May start of the strike, which they did all on the Universal backlot on Colonial Street. Now, this tiny piece of real estate, this typical American suburb street, is the perfect place to deconstruct the myths of suburbia, because these buildings and those sidewalks have been featured in everything that taught us what suburbia was meant to be. The Munsters, Leave It to Beaver, The Hardy Boys, Adam 12, Dragnet, Gremlins, it should be noted, Marcus Welby, Murder, She Wrote, and eventually Desperate Housewives. Apparently, this and Fletch Lives were the only films in production during this period, and because they had no chance to rewrite, Dante relied on the more than game cast to improv as much as they were on book, and to that end, shot the movie mostly chronologically, so that anything mentioned early might reappear later. I have read the script, so I can tell you that a lot of the more memorable lines and bits of business came from the cast, but just as many came from Olson's script. I figured Satan is good, Satan is your pal was probably from Rick Dukeman, but I didn't expect to run to me, run to water to be in the script, and there it is. Dante, wise man that he is, knew with contemporary Jimmy Stewart and overall likable guy Tom Hanks that the original ending probably wasn't going to fly, so he shot 3. When you watch the movie, everything happens as scripted until Ray throws himself onto that gurney and then gets in the ambulance. The throwing himself on the gurney was Hanks, by the way. And that gives us the ending that we received, which is the Klopeks are the villains, and then they're defeated, and Ray goes on vacation. Another ending, which, after the way Explorers ended, I was convinced when I saw the film that this had to be the actual ending. The Klopeks are totally innocent and all of the suburbanites are monsters. And then the actual scripted ending. I said everything up until the ambulance was the actual end, but it actually goes further than that, because Klopek reveals himself as a murderer. The ambulance speeds away with Ray's muffled screams receding into the distance. He was right all along and no one will ever know. The movie was thought of as a flop at the time, which is bizarre. It made $50 million on a budget of $18. I guess everyone just kept expecting Gremlins numbers, which is unfair at best. Where it definitely did fall down was critically, with Dante noting it was the worst received film of his career. Fuck him. It's a cult classic now, and it's got a killer fucking soundtrack by Jerry Goldsmith. And Dante would return to the world of off-kilter suburbia just a year or two later with the one-season wonder that was Erie, Indiana. Now, there's a wildly underappreciated series, and I hope if anyone were to revive it, they'd let Mr. Dante play a significant role in its development, because if you don't, you get The Burbs.
At night I can't sleep. I toss and turn candlesticks at the...
You must be Rob Fisher's wife. Welcome to Ashfield Place, the safest town in America.
We went from city loft to lawn so fast.
I know living in my parents' house wasn't exactly part of the plan.
Every day is the same thing. These people are crazy.
It's the Burbs, babes.
So what's the deal with that old Victorian house? It's haunted.
There have been whispers of
Murder. Who would move into a murder house?
I did see him in the woods. I'm not sure what he was up to. I had to give him space. I was nude.
In the woods?
I was moonbathing.
House needs a lot of work. But it has good bones.
Who says that? The girl from the suburbs disappears into thin air? He's hiding something.
I think we should investigate.
I feel like Sherlock Holmes.
I think if anything, I'd be Sherlock Holmes.
Don't accent privilege this.
You can't just break in. From a legal standpoint, we're not breaking in. Okay, we're walking into an unlocked house.
Investigating a joint of traps.
She keeps asking questions about the house across the street.
What'd you tell her?
What is there to tell?
Yep, I just peed a little.
Your mind's playing tricks on you.
But it's not him we need to be worried about.
You learned that from a podcast?
Oh, no. What's happening?
Which one of us is the murderer? Your face. The safest town in America has a lot of people desperate to leave.
This is the part that gets a little bit complicated.
Aren't small towns just the best?
It is the safest
Town in America.
What are we doing? Let's go.
I think this place is going to grow on you, you know.
Okay.
Playing tricks on me.
Why am I always murder adjacent?
Executive producer Seth MacFarlane. Well, you know it's going to be good. The actual writing and running of the show are done by Celeste Hughes, who was a producer and writer on Oh You Pretty Things and Dead to Me and Palm Royale. I have seen none of those, but having watched this series in its entirety, I get the gist. On the surface, The Burbs is a natural for a limited series. The inner workings of a neighborhood and the way it implodes when a new element is introduced. Dramatize that over 8 to 10 episodes and it could be great. I imagine more than the Klopek house would end up detonating by the end. What new and horrifying images can you make of nocturnal trash being beaten or backyard digging? Turns out not much at all. Because this new series isn't interested in anything the film had to say. I'm not sure why it's called The Burbs at all, other than we all love that movie, and that's kind of infuriating. Kind of, because it's impossible to be mad at this series or anyone involved. The cast is a murderer's row of lovable character actors. Keke Palmer, Paula Pell, Julia Duffy for fuck's sake. And it's shot on the very same backlot using the very same houses that we know from the first film. And there are some analogs to the original film, though Ray Patterson is now Samira, who's home not because she's bought into the idea of suburbia being a vacation unto itself, but she's on maternity leave. Although she and her husband are the transplants, having just moved to the neighborhood, though her husband did grow up there, which explains his English accent. Can Jack Whitehall not do an American accent? Is he the one modern English actor still fumbling around with hard R's? So he said, fuck it, I'll just make everything as confusing as watching an interview with Gillian Anderson in 1995 and watching one now. That's a nitpick. You know what isn't? The fact that they've basically abandoned everything that made the Burbs fun and interesting and memorable. Fine, go in a whole new direction. Remakes shouldn't be carbon copies. Carpenter's Thing is a pale echo of the Hawks original, but the new and innovative path this series has chosen is nothing more than a bald-faced ripoff of Only Murders in the Building. This is no longer a, what is that family up to? It's who in the neighborhood is committing murder, potentially a murder from the past that several of our neighborhood dwellers have been mixed up in. And get the fuck out of here. And you can see from very early on that is the intent of the show, and it's a drag. But then Justin Kirk showed up as a one-man Klopek family, and I thought, oh, well, this is going to be interesting. Justin Kirk should be a huge fucking star. I'm not sure why he isn't. Check out his much-lauded and much-deserved-to-be-lauded performance in Angels in America. The man is sublime. But no, he's just another spoke in this Burbs and Murders in the Building mashup. Truly, who amongst us watched Rick Dukeman's art character and didn't think, I wonder how his marriage is doing? Let's spend a painful amount of time dwelling on that. Like I said, there are nods to the first film. The neighborhood dog is named Darla, for original Queenie thespian Darla, the dog who starred not only in The Burbs, not only in Batman Returns, but she was also precious in Silence of the Lambs. Tom Hanks shows up in an old-timey photo of Hinkley Hill's yesteryear, and Wendy Shaw and I'm spoiling nothing, Corey Feldman from the original film show up in cameos. This is 2 weeks in a row, folks. I'm trying to stay positive. And you know what? This might be your thing. If you have no allegiance to the film and love a good casual investigation show, then this is for you. Lord knows there aren't enough group of friends investigating murder shows out there. But as an update of The Burbs, this is a colossal failure. I thanked the spirit of Skip the psychotic soda jerk when the last 2 episodes were mercifully only 30 minutes. That's right, each of these episodes is nearly an hour. It was punishing. You know what? Don't watch it. I'm sorry. As genial as it is, there are so many better examples of this type of television. I actually thought this type of television was on its way out. What do I know? I know that Joe Dante wouldn't have let this happen. Come on, gang. Let's go and watch all the Joe Dante movies. Any 3 random selections will counteract the effects of this languidly paced, hardly funny at all series. And that's all I got for the Roundup this week. Please tune back in Monday for the latest in Hammer House of Horror. Mike White joins me to talk about Charlie Boy. It's a voodoo doll. As for me, if you want to support the show, desperately needed, that's patreon.com/Father Malone. Or if you want to drop me a line and become one of those pen pals from around the world, fathermalone71@gmail.com. Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight, gang.
Well, there used to be a big drugstore down on the corner there. It had a big soda fountain in it. You remember that? Yeah. Yeah, the guy who ran it was a rotund guy. He had glasses. His name was Skip. Lived over in Elm, had a wife, a couple kids, you know, not too sharp. I mean, hey, the guy's 40 years old. He's wearing a paper hat, and he's making cherry cokes. It's a cinch he's not running for governor, right? Anyway, it got hot that summer. I remember it got real hot. It was sweltering. You know that heat where your underwear sweats and it crawls up the... Anyway, it's hot, okay? And they start smelling this really vile stench over on Elm, and they figure it's coming from Skip's place. And no one wants to say anything. I mean, what do? Go knock on the guy's door? Hi, your house stinks. So people are trying to ignore it, right? They're trying to pretend it isn't happening. And you know those pine things? They're trying to cover up with those pine things that you put in cars. People are hanging those on their porches. Oh, you think that's funny, Ricky?
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah? Let me tell you what happened next, okay? The state health inspector shows up. They go over, they talk to Skip. He says he's got a sump pump problem. They leave. Hey, the guy's got a little sewer problem. He says he'll look after it. Everything's okay, right? Wrong. A couple hours later, there's smoke pouring out of the windows of Skip's house. The firemen show up. They go into Skip's house. You know what they find?
What?
Skip's family. Dead. Murdered. By Skip. Weeks earlier. With an ice pick. Yeah. The guy killed his whole family. With an ice pick. Yeah. Yeah, just put him in the cool basement, covered him up with a sheet, and went back to making ice cream treats for the townsfolk. Only thing, Skip didn't count on there being a big heat wave that summer. You know what that was that all those people were smelling over on Elm, Ricky?
What?
Skip's family's bodies decomposing in the summer heat. Yeah, apparently one day Skip just made one too many lemon phosphates. El Snapo.
I remember that. I remember hearing about that when I was a kid. They tore down the soda fountain that fall.
You know, these towns are full of those kind of stories. Sometimes they're happening right under your nose.